I caught my boyfriend planning to move in with another woman while I thought we were happy together for 3 years. I'm 29F and I still can't believe I'm writing this. 2 weeks ago I discovered my boyfriend of 3 years has been planning to move in with another woman and I feel like my entire reality has been a lie. I need outside perspective because I'm questioning everything I thought I knew about my relationship and my own judgment. My boyfriend's name is Adrian, he's 31, we met at a friend's birthday party 3 years ago and hit it off immediately. He's a graphic designer who freelances from home and I work as a dental hygienist at a practice downtown. We've been living separately the whole time we've been together. He has a studio apartment in the Arts District and I have a 1-bedroom closer to my work. We've talked about moving in together multiple times over the past year. Every time I'd bring it up Adrian would say he wanted to wait until his lease was up or until he had more steady income or until he found a bigger place. The excuses always made sense in the moment so I never pushed too hard. I figured we'd get there eventually. Our relationship felt solid. We saw each other 3 or 4 times a week. We'd have dinner together, watch movies, go hiking on weekends. He'd stay over at my place sometimes and I'd stay at his. We said I love you. We talked about future plans in vague terms like someday we'll get a dog or when we're living together we can host dinner parties. Nothing felt off. About 5 months ago I started noticing Adrian was on his phone more than usual, not in an obvious way but just constantly checking it, responding to messages with this little smile, being protective about the screen. I asked him a couple times who he was talking to and he'd say work clients or his buddy Nathan or his sister. I didn't think much of it because Adrian's always been social and his work requires a lot of client communication, but something felt different about the way he'd tilt his phone away from me or how he'd wait until I left the room to respond to certain messages. 4 months ago we were supposed to go to a concert together. I'd bought tickets weeks in advance for this band we both love. The day before the concert Adrian texted saying he had a family emergency and needed to drive to Seattle to help his mom with something. He said he was really sorry and we'd make it up. I was disappointed but I understood. Family comes first. I ended up taking my friend Becca to the concert instead. We had a good time but I kept thinking about Adrian and hoping his mom was okay. The next day I texted him asking how everything went and he said it was fine. His mom had a plumbing issue and he'd helped her find a contractor. We moved on from it and I didn't think about it again until much later. 3 months ago Adrian started being less available on weekends. He'd say he had client deadlines or he was helping Nathan with a house project or he just needed some alone time to recharge. I'm not a clingy person so I gave him space. I used the time to catch up with friends and work on my own hobbies. But looking back now I realize the pattern. He was slowly creating distance without making it obvious enough for me to notice. He was still affectionate when we were together, still said he loved me, still made plans for next week or next month. Nothing felt like a red flag in isolation. 2 months ago we were at his apartment and I needed to use his laptop to check something because my phone had died. He hesitated before handing it to me, which was weird because we'd used each other's devices before without any issue. I brushed it off and pulled up a browser. When I opened it there were multiple tabs already open. I wasn't trying to snoop but I noticed one of them was Zillow with apartment listings. I got excited thinking maybe he was finally looking at places for us to move in together. I clicked on the tab and saw he'd been looking at 2-bedroom apartments in a neighborhood about 30 minutes from where we both currently live. I asked him about it and he seemed caught off guard. He said he was just browsing, thinking about upgrading from his studio. I asked why he was looking at 2 bedrooms if it was just for him and he said he wanted space for a home office. That made sense because he works from home and his current setup is cramped. I asked if we should look at places together since we'd been talking about moving in and he said he wanted to handle his own move first and then we could figure out our timeline. That stung a little because it felt like he was planning his future without me in it, but I told myself I was being oversensitive. He had every right to upgrade his living situation on his own timeline. 6 weeks ago Adrian told me he was going on a camping trip with Nathan and some college friends for a long weekend. He said they'd be up in the mountains with no cell service so I wouldn't be able to reach him. I said okay and told him to have fun. The weekend he was supposedly camping I was hanging out with Becca and we decided to grab lunch at this brunch place we'd been wanting to try. It's in a trendy neighborhood that's kind of far from where I live but Becca had been raving about it. We were waiting for a table when I saw Adrian walk by outside holding hands with a woman I'd never seen before. My stomach dropped. I told Becca to look and she saw them too. They stopped at a crosswalk and he kissed her forehead. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Becca asked if I was okay and I said I needed to go outside. By the time I got out there they were gone. I stood on the sidewalk trying to figure out if I'd actually seen what I thought I'd seen. Maybe it was someone who looked like Adrian. Maybe I was losing my mind. Becca said it definitely looked like him but maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a cousin or a friend going through something. I wanted to believe that but the hand-holding and forehead kiss didn't feel platonic. I tried calling Adrian and it went straight to voicemail. I texted him and obviously got no response because he was supposedly in the mountains with no service. I spent the rest of that weekend feeling sick. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on anything. When Adrian got back from his trip on Monday, I asked him how it was and he said great, showed me a few photos on his phone of him and Nathan at a campsite. The photos looked legitimate. I asked if anyone else had been there and he listed a few names of guys I'd met before. I wanted to ask if he'd seen anyone else that weekend, if he'd been in the city at all, but I felt crazy. What if I'd been mistaken? What if I accused him based on a random sighting and ruined everything? So I said nothing. That was my mistake. I should have trusted what I saw. Over the next few weeks I started paying closer attention. Adrian's phone habits got worse. He started keeping his phone face down all the time. He'd take calls in another room. He password protected his laptop, which he'd never done before. I asked him directly if something was going on and he looked genuinely confused. He asked what I meant and I said he seemed distant lately. He said work had been stressful and he'd been dealing with some difficult clients. He apologized for being distracted and suggested we plan a weekend trip together. We went to the coast 2 weeks later and it was nice. Adrian was attentive and sweet. We talked about maybe getting a dog in the next year. We had sex in the hotel room and it felt connected and real. I convinced myself I'd been paranoid about the woman I'd seen. Then last week everything came crashing down. Adrian had stayed over at my place on Tuesday night. He left early Wednesday morning for a client meeting. He was in a rush and forgot his iPad on my coffee table. I didn't notice until that evening when I was cleaning up. I texted him that he'd left it and he said he'd grab it next time he came over. I said okay and went back to watching TV, but then the iPad lit up with a notification and I saw a text preview from someone named Morgan. The preview said can't wait to see the new place on Saturday. Are you excited? My heart started racing. I picked up the iPad and saw more notifications coming in from Morgan. I know it was wrong but I opened the messages. The conversation went back months, at least 4 or 5 months from what I could see scrolling. Morgan and Adrian were clearly together, not just friends. The messages were full of I love you and I miss you and can't wait to fall asleep next to you every night. I felt like I was going to throw up. I kept scrolling and found messages about apartment hunting, about signing a lease, about furniture shopping. Morgan had sent photos of paint samples and asked which color Adrian liked for the bedroom. There were messages about telling people. Morgan had written I know you're worried about how to handle your situation but we'll figure it out together. And Adrian had responded I just need a little more time to end things properly. I don't want to hurt her. He was talking about me. I was the situation he needed to handle. I scrolled further and found messages from months ago, right around the time I'd seen them together. Morgan had written today was perfect. I love exploring the city with you. And Adrian had responded I love you so much. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. They'd been together for at least 6 months, maybe longer. The entire time Adrian had been pulling away from me and making excuses about moving in together. He'd been planning a future with someone else. I found the lease they'd signed. Morgan had sent a photo of it. They were moving into a 2-bedroom apartment starting this Saturday, 4 days from now. The apartment was in the same neighborhood I'd seen on Adrian's Zillow search months ago. I sat on my couch holding his iPad and I couldn't stop shaking. My boyfriend of 3 years had been living a double life for at least half of our relationship. He'd looked me in the eye and said I love you while planning to move in with another woman. I took screenshots of everything, the messages, the lease, the photos Morgan had sent of furniture they'd bought together. I sent them all to myself and then I texted Adrian. I wrote, you left your iPad here. I saw the messages with Morgan. I know about the apartment. I know you've been lying to me for months. Don't bother coming to get your iPad. I'll leave it outside my door. He called immediately and I didn't answer. He called 6 more times and I ignored all of them. He started texting saying please let me explain. It's not what it looks like. I need to talk to you. I blocked his number. I put his iPad in a box with the few things he'd left at my place over the years and I left it outside my apartment door. I texted him from my work phone that his stuff was outside and he needed to pick it up and never contact me again. An hour later the box was gone. That was 5 days ago. I've been a wreck since then. I called in sick to work twice because I couldn't stop crying. Becca has been staying with me to make sure I'm okay. She's furious on my behalf. She wants to find Morgan on social media and message her but I told her not to. I don't know if Morgan knows about me. Based on the messages it seems like she might not. Adrian told her he had a situation to handle which could mean he told her we were broken up or on the verge of breaking up. Or maybe she knows about me and doesn't care. Either way I don't want to be the person who reaches out to the other woman. I just want to be done with all of it. My question is, what do I do now? Do I reach out to Morgan and tell her what Adrian did? Do I blast him on social media so our mutual friends know what happened? Do I just disappear and move on with my life? Part of me wants him to face consequences. I want everyone to know he's a liar and a cheater, but another part of me just wants to forget this ever happened and start over. I keep replaying the last 3 years trying to figure out what was real and what was performance. Did he ever actually love me or was I just convenient until he found someone better? When did it start? Was he looking for someone else the whole time we were together? I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner, for ignoring the signs, for believing his excuses. How did I not notice my boyfriend was building an entire separate relationship while still telling me he loved me? So internet strangers, what would you do? How do I move forward from this? Update, 3 weeks later. I didn't think I'd be back, but a lot has happened and I need to get it out. The last 3 weeks have been some of the worst of my life, but I'm starting to see a path forward. After I posted originally, I took everyone's advice and focused on myself. I blocked Adrian on everything. I told our mutual friends what had happened. The reactions were mixed, which was eye-opening in itself. Some people were immediately supportive and cut Adrian off completely. They were horrified and angry on my behalf. But a few people I thought were my friends, suggested maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was more to the story. Maybe Adrian and I had communication issues that led to this. Those friendships didn't survive. I realized anyone who could excuse what he did wasn't someone I wanted in my life. The first week after the discovery was brutal. I barely functioned. I went to work and came home and cried. Becca practically moved in with me. She'd make me eat and forced me to get out of the apartment at least once a day, even if it was just to walk around the block. I started seeing a therapist who specializes in betrayal and infidelity. She's been helpful in processing everything. She said what Adrian did was particularly cruel because he kept me invested in the relationship while actively planning his exit. He was using me as emotional support while building his future with someone else. That validated a lot of what I'd been feeling. It wasn't just cheating. It was calculated deception over months. 8 days after I confronted him via text, I got a long email from Adrian. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. He wrote that he was sorry for how everything happened, that he'd never meant to hurt me, that he'd met Morgan at a design conference 7 months ago and they'd connected in a way he hadn't expected. He said he'd tried to end things with me multiple times, but he kept losing his nerve because he cared about me and didn't want to hurt me. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. He didn't want to hurt me, so instead he carried on a 7-month affair and planned an entire move with another woman while still saying he loved me. He said he'd been planning to tell me the truth after he moved in with Morgan, that he was going to sit me down and explain everything. He said he knew that didn't make it better, but he wanted me to understand his perspective. I read that email 3 times trying to find any real accountability, and there was none. It was all justifications and excuses. He never once said I was wrong to lie to you for 7 months. He never acknowledged the cruelty of keeping me in a relationship he'd already mentally left. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. 2 weeks ago, I did something I'm not sure I should have done. I found Morgan on Instagram. Her profile was public and full of photos, including recent ones of her and Adrian together at the apartment they'd moved into. The photos were dated from the weekend after I'd confronted him, so he'd moved in with her within days of our relationship ending. There were photos of them painting walls and assembling furniture and holding coffee cups in their new kitchen. The captions were all about new beginnings and exciting chapters. There was no mention of me or the relationship he'd just blown up. I scrolled through her older posts and found photos of her and Adrian going back 6 months, dinners out, weekend trips, museum visits, an entire relationship documented publicly while he was still with me. I looked at the dates of her posts and cross-referenced them with my own memories. There was a photo of them at a botanical garden dated the same weekend Adrian had told me he was helping Nathan with a house project. There was a photo of them at a wine tasting dated the same day he'd cancelled our plans because of a client emergency. Every excuse he'd given me corresponded with time he'd spent with her. I felt sick looking at the photos, but I also felt strangely validated. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the distance or the lies. It had all been real. I noticed Morgan's posts never mentioned she had a boyfriend, which made me think she might not have known about me either. Or maybe she knew and chose not to acknowledge it publicly. I debated messaging her for days. Becca said I should because she deserved to know what kind of person Adrian was. My therapist said it was my decision, but I should think about what I hoped to accomplish. Finally, 10 days ago, I sent her a message. I kept it simple and factual. I wrote, "Hi Morgan, you don't know me, but my name is Casey. I was in a relationship with Adrian for 3 years up until 3 weeks ago when I discovered he'd been with you for the last 7 months. I don't know if he told you about me, but I thought you should know that he was actively in a committed relationship with me the entire time he was seeing you. He was still telling me he loved me and staying over at my place days before he moved in with you. I'm not trying to cause problems, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about who you're living with." I attached a few screenshots of text conversations between Adrian and me from the months he'd been with Morgan, conversations where he'd told me he loved me and talked about our future. She read the message within an hour but didn't respond. I figured she either didn't believe me or didn't care. Either way, I'd done what I felt was right. 3 days later she responded. She wrote, "Thank you for telling me. Adrian told me you two had broken up over a year ago and had stayed friends. He said you were having trouble moving on, which is why he hadn't introduced me to his friend group yet. I had no idea you were still together. I feel sick. I've confronted him and he's admitted he lied to both of us. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I wanted you to know I didn't knowingly participate in cheating on you. I read that message and felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Morgan hadn't known. Adrian had lied to both of us. He'd constructed completely separate narratives to keep both relationships going. I wrote back thanking her for responding and said I believed she hadn't known. I told her what he'd done was manipulation and we'd both been victims of it. We ended up messaging back and forth for the next few hours, comparing timelines and stories, filling in gaps for each other. She told me Adrian had been extremely attentive and romantic with her, always planning dates and surprising her with thoughtful gifts. She said he'd told her he'd been single for over a year and was ready for something serious. He'd introduced her to some of his friends but never the ones who would have known about me. He'd kept her separate from his established life, which she thought was just because things were new. She said they'd signed the lease on the apartment 2 months ago and she'd started buying furniture and planning the space. She'd invested emotionally and financially in this future with him. Now she was living in an apartment with someone who'd lied to her from the very beginning. I asked her what she was planning to do and she said she didn't know. They'd signed a year lease together and moving out would be complicated and expensive, but she didn't know if she could stay with someone who'd been that deceptive. I told her I understood and whatever she decided I wished her the best. We agreed to stay in touch. Talking to Morgan was surreal but also healing in a weird way. Knowing I hadn't been paranoid or oversensitive, knowing the lies had been extensive and deliberate, it helped me stop blaming myself. Last week Morgan texted me and said she'd decided to end things with Adrian. She'd told him to move out. He'd tried to convince her to stay and work through it, but she said the trust was completely broken. She said he'd broken down crying and said he'd ruined everything, that he loved her and he'd made terrible mistakes but he wanted to fix it. She told him there was nothing to fix, he'd made his choices. She asked if she could call me and we talked for over an hour. We bonded over this strange shared experience of loving the same person who'd turned out to be someone completely different than who we'd thought. It's bizarre becoming friends with the woman your boyfriend cheated on you with, but in some ways Morgan is the only person who really understands what I'm going through. Adrian apparently moved back to his studio apartment which he'd kept the whole time he was planning to move in with Morgan. Another lie. He told her he was giving up his studio to fully commit to their shared space but he'd kept it as a backup. Morgan texted me yesterday saying Adrian had been trying to contact her constantly, leaving voicemails and showing up at the apartment. She had to threaten to call the police to get him to stop. She said he'd also been posting cryptic things on social media about making mistakes and losing the love of his life. Mutual friends had been reaching out to her asking what happened and she'd been telling them the truth. As for me, I'm doing better, not great but better. I still have days where I can't believe this happened, where I replay conversations and try to figure out what was real. My therapist says that's normal, that it takes time to process this kind of betrayal and rebuild trust in your own judgment. I've been focusing on work and spending time with friends who've proven themselves. I picked up hobbies I'd let slide while I was with Adrian. I've been running again and I joined a book club. I'm not dating and I don't plan to for a while. The idea of trusting someone new feels impossible right now. But I'm moving forward. I'm building a life that's fully mine, not shared with someone who is only half present. Morgan and I still text every few days. We're thinking about grabbing coffee soon, which sounds insane but also feels right. We're both trying to make sense of what happened and having someone who was there helps. So that's the update. Adrian is out of my life. Morgan left him too, and I'm slowly healing from 3 years of what I now know was partial truth at best. It's not the ending I wanted, but it's better than staying with someone who could look me in the eye and lie so completely. Final update, 2 months later. This will be my last update because I've reached a point where I'm ready to close this chapter completely. The last 2 months have been transformative in ways I didn't expect. After my last post, things settled into a new normal. Adrian stopped trying to contact me after I threatened legal action for harassment. Morgan and I did end up meeting for coffee and it was surprisingly not awkward. We talked about everything, about how Adrian had managed to keep both relationships separate, about the specific lies he'd told each of us, about how we'd both missed signs because we'd trusted him. Morgan told me more about their relationship and I realized Adrian had basically been living 2 completely different lives. With me he was the steady boyfriend who wanted to take things slow. With her he was the passionate romantic ready to commit immediately. Neither version was the real Adrian, or maybe both were. Maybe he's just someone who becomes whoever he thinks his partner wants him to be. Morgan moved out of the apartment they'd signed together. She found a roommate to take over her portion of the lease and moved in with a friend. She said being in that space where they'd planned a future was too painful. Last I heard Adrian is still in that 2-bedroom apartment alone paying double rent. Part of me feels satisfied knowing he's facing practical consequences. 6 weeks ago I ran into him at a coffee shop. It was completely accidental. I'd gone there to meet Becca and he was sitting in the corner with his laptop. He saw me and his face went pale. I thought about leaving but then I decided I had every right to be there. I wasn't going to rearrange my life to avoid him. He came over to my table and asked if we could talk. I said no. He said he'd been in therapy and working on himself and he understood now how badly he'd messed up. He said he wanted a chance to apologize properly. I told him I didn't need his apology, that I'd moved past it and I wasn't interested in giving him closure. He looked genuinely hurt and said he thought we could at least be civil. I said civil doesn't mean I have to engage with him. I asked him to leave me alone and he did. Becca arrived a few minutes later and I told her what happened. She said I'd handled it perfectly, that I didn't owe him anything. That encounter was actually helpful because I realized I felt nothing looking at him, no anger, no sadness, no lingering love, just nothing. He was a stranger I used to know. I've been doing a lot of work in therapy on understanding why I stayed in a relationship where things felt off, why I ignored my gut. My therapist said I have a tendency to prioritize other people's comfort over my own intuition, that I'd talked myself out of my own suspicions because I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. That's something I'm actively working on, learning to trust myself again, learning that it's okay to ask questions and expect honest answers. I'm also working on understanding that I wasn't stupid or blind. I was with someone who was actively deceiving me and who was skilled at it. Adrian maintained 2 separate relationships for 7 months without either of us knowing. That takes calculation and effort. It's not something I could have prevented by being more vigilant. Morgan and I have stayed in touch. We text occasionally and we've met for coffee a few more times. We've joked about starting a support group for women who dated Adrian. She's doing well. She's seeing someone new which she's nervous about but hopeful. I'm genuinely happy for her. As for my own life, I've made some big changes. I got a promotion at work which came with a significant raise. I've been saving to buy a small condo, something that's entirely mine. The finality of that coffee shop moment was a turning point for me. I realized I wasn't just moving on. I was already gone. The person who was devastated by Adrian's betrayal was a version of me I was leaving behind. About a month ago I decided to make a change I'd been thinking about for a long time. I moved out of my old apartment and into a different neighborhood entirely, a fresh start with new walls and no shared memories. I didn't tell Adrian where I was moving. I didn't tell our mutual friends who were still in contact with him. I didn't want him to have access to my life in any way, not even through secondhand stories. My new place is smaller but it's mine in a way the old one never was. I painted the walls myself. I bought furniture I picked out alone. I created a space that reflected only my tastes and my comfort. It sounds simple but it felt revolutionary after years of compromise and consideration for a partner who wasn't doing the same for me. Morgan actually helped me move, which was a strange and wonderful day. We laughed about the absurdity of the situation, that the 2 women he deceived were now friends helping each other build new lives. She brought her new boyfriend to help and he was nice, normal, they seemed happy together. I felt genuinely happy for her without any jealousy or bitterness. It was a sign of how far I'd come. My therapist says I processed the trauma of the betrayal in a remarkably healthy way, that by connecting with Morgan I'd created a bridge over the narrative Adrian had constructed. We'd validated each other's experiences and in doing so, taken back the power he'd tried to steal from us. 3 weeks ago I was at the grocery store and I saw Adrian's mom. I hadn't spoken to her since everything happened. She saw me and immediately came over. She said she was so sorry for what her son had done to me, that she'd had no idea about any of it until Morgan had called her after their breakup. She told me Adrian had confessed everything to her, that he'd been unhappy in our relationship for a long time but hadn't known how to end it. She said she'd raised him better than that and she was ashamed of his behavior. I told her I appreciated that but that she didn't need to apologize for him. He was an adult who'd made his own choices. She started crying and said she understood if I never wanted to see her again but that she'd always care about me. I thanked her and said I wished her well. It was a sad but peaceful interaction, a final thread being tied off. After that I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was missing. Hearing from his mother that she knew the truth and didn't excuse it felt more significant than anything Adrian could have said to me. Last week I officially hit my savings goal for a down payment. I'm starting to look at condos next month. The idea of owning my own place, of building equity in my own future instead of waiting for someone else to build it with me. I've started traveling on my own, something I'd always been too nervous to do. I took a long weekend trip to a city I'd always wanted to visit. I wandered through museums and ate at restaurants by myself and it was wonderful. I discovered I'm actually really good company. I still think about the 3 years sometimes, not with pain but with a kind of detached curiosity, like studying a historical event that happened to someone else. Adrian tried to follow me on Instagram last week from a new account. I blocked it immediately without a second thought. That's the biggest change, the mental shift. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even hurt in the way I was. It's more like a scar now, a part of my history but not a current wound. Morgan and I don't talk as much anymore, which feels natural and right. We were connected by a traumatic event, not by shared interests or life goals. Our friendship served its purpose and now we're both moving in different directions. And that's okay. Some people are in your life for a season, they help you through something and then you both move on. So this is the real ending, not with a dramatic confrontation or a perfect new relationship, but with quiet contentment, with a life that's mine alone. I'm not who I was before all this. I'm more careful with my trust, but I'm also more confident in my own judgment. I trust my gut now in a way I never did before. If something feels off, I pay attention now. I don't talk myself out of my own feelings anymore. I learned that closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you build yourself from the pieces they left behind.